October 1st, 2020, and this is the Fight Business Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Auger, and today we have a very special guest with us, sports immigration attorney, Sherrod Seward. Sherrod, how you doing?
It's a crazy time in my world, but I'm glad the phone is ringing.
It's always good to have a phone ringing more than to have it dead silent, but I know how that could go with business. I saw your interview with Jason Cruz a while back from MMA Payout. Shout out to him. He does fantastic work. I've seen your posts on, what you've been doing for the combat sports community, all of that. Just for our listeners that may not have heard that interview, how did you get into specializing in sports immigration and becoming basically as far as I know, the biggest player in terms of getting combat sports visas?
You know what? Maybe I am. I haven't been able to look around and see who else is out there. But I got into this because in law school in Cleveland, Ohio, I happened to do an independent research project on mixed martial arts broadcasting, which led me to basically an internship and then a kind of a sales job with the North American Allied Fight Series, which has a lot of fighters from strong style MMA, which of course includes Stipe, but also used to include Cody Garbrandt, Jessica Ai, and Forrest Petz, and a lot of other great fighters from Ohio. So years down the line, when I kind of got out of having a job and started a law firm on my own, I got convinced to start an immigration law practice. And one of my first calls was for a P1A visa for a boxer. And I've never looked back since.
That's awesome. I mean, especially, getting to work with strong style and see strong style fighters, because I'm assuming at that point, people probably didn't know Jessica Ai or Stipe or Cody, much. They were still up and coming. So that's got to be some great experience right off the bat.
I beg to differ. A lot of people knew who they were. I'll tell you what, the first MMA event I went to was a Strike Force event, but this is when they were getting sold and like Coker, they really didn't care what was going on. And there was like 200 people in a sold out, like a big arena. There's only 200 people there. And I was like, oh, this sucks. There's nothing what it looks like on TV. But my second fight too, I went to, and Jessica Ai was the main event. And the co-event was Stipe. He wasn't the main event. And it was in a pavilion in Cleveland, and it was packed with like 7,000 people. And I didn't know who Jessica was. So I left after the Stipe fight thinking like, what else is there to see here? But apparently she fought Aisling Daly that day. And that was her first professional loss, but it was a big deal because she was considered like, the best fighter in her weight class in the world at that time. But I didn't know who she was, so I kind of left after the co-main event, not knowing what was going on. But she's great. Shout out to her.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I had no clue either.
Bjorn Stepney was there, and he signed a fighter, and it wasn't Stipe. But I think Stipe got signed to the UFC after that fight too. So a lot happened that day.
Yeah, apparently. That's awesome. You talked about that P1A visa. I feel like not a lot of people we've seen, at least on the layman's fan, right, has seen like, oh, there's visa issues preventing this fight, or somebody so-and-so needs to get his visa. I know Islam Makhachev, everyone has talked about him from a long time for getting visas into the U.S., but not a lot of people know the process at all. They just see, oh, somebody had visa issues, and they just kind of shrug. In terms of the different types of visas that these combat sports athletes can get, or just general sports athletes can get from other countries, right?
Right.
I think the easiest way, and let me know if this makes sense. If it doesn't, we could pivot. But I think the easiest way might just be to kind of do a hypothetical of, let's say I'm a fighter from Norway and I'm looking to come into the U.S. to fight for the UFC. What are my options? How does that all work? Right.
So historically, what would happen if a fighter is interested in coming to the UFC is like first the UFC would sign them, and then the UFC would apply for a P1A visa, and that's the most common visa for professional athletes to have to get the work authorization to come to the United States. Another example of so say if somebody gets drafted to the NBA, they're also on P1A visas, and that visa is tied to their contract or their bout. But right now there's some complications because over the years, well, over the past 3 years, it's gotten a lot more difficult to get these work authorization visas, to the point that the UFC is kind of restricted. They've kind of drawn back on when they will get a fighter a visa. Usually it's if they only have a fight scheduled in the United States, as opposed to when you were signed. Usually they used to do it and get you one for a couple of years. Now it's common for them to get it for a couple months, just why that fighter has a fight here, which can be a problem if they're trying to train or if they're not yet signed to the UFC. And that's a lot of times where I come in, where fighters are not yet signed to the UFC, or if they're in the UFC and want to keep their visa going for multiple years.
Got it. And so the promotion, right, if we're saying a hypothetical of UFC here, they're the ones that essentially request the visa, pays for it and all of that if it's for a bout. But then if they're trying to get in for training or something, a fighter would do that on their own through you. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's the way it's trending right now, because I have actually a pretty good relationship with they call it the Global Mobility Team at the Ultimate Fighting Championships. And you got to think that they're getting visas for people all over the world. So when it stopped being so cookie cutter to get them in and started getting more tough, that's when they kind of backed out and allowed, opportunities for somebody like, me to come in and work directly with the management teams to get them visas to come in. And then there's a whole nother heap of stuff even after you get approved now, because a lot of these fighters are from Europe where you can't get appointments and there's a COVID ban. So there's 2 extra steps that we're having to go through to get athletes here, but it's happening.
Got it. Yeah, and that was actually going to be my next question is with – I can only imagine the pandemic has made this – you said it's changed over the past couple of years. I can only imagine pandemics made it far more complicated with everything going on. So with the countries that do have a COVID ban, can fighters just not come in at all? Can they come in as long as they take certain steps? What happens if, you're in a country where there's a COVID ban, either one way or the other? What does that look like to get a fighter to the U.S. and back, or vice versa?
All right, so there's 2 separate pathways. They both start with one getting a visa approved, whether it's a P1A, and there's some other type of visa categories that I do for athletes, depending on their credentials. But if you're already signed with the UFC is included on a list of exempted organizations with the White House and Department of Homeland Security, such as the NBA, the NFL, the PGA is on there, where they can go basically send information to Customs and Border Protection, and then those names get put on a special list that gets special waivers. Now, if you're not signed to the UFC, you don't have that type of resource. So we have to do it the hard way. And what that involves is we do a special petition to try to get them an interview, because a lot of times their interview to get their visa stamps are months from now, like in January and February. So we expedite their interview, and then we do a national interest exemption, where basically we say that this person's important to the business that's sponsoring them, which is usually their management company. And we make an argument that they should be given their own waiver because they're not privy to the other sports exemptions, because they're not already in the UFC. And every consulate around the world is different with how they're accepting and looking at these petitions. So I might be venue shopping at consulates all across Europe to try to get in. But since we do it so much on a day-to-day basis, we're having a lot of success. And that's why the phone's ringing. But there's a lot to do every time it rings.
Yeah, no, I mean, that sounds, the fact that you're going and shopping to different consulates, that sounds like your phone's going to be ringing a lot and from a ton of different locations. So that's got to be really fun. With what you're talking about, getting someone in before they're signed to the UFC, something of that nature, something I'd seen on the podcast that you did with Jason Cruz was you talked about getting different training partners in on special visas. And one thing that stood out to me was that if I'm understanding this correctly, if a training partner comes in or if a fighter was to come in and fight with no sponsorship and fight for prize money, they could do that on a visitor's visa. Is that right?
That's correct. Under the regulations, you are permitted to compete for prize money. Now, but you got to be careful with that, because a lot of times in combat sports, you get show money and money to win. So in this case, if you're getting show money, that doesn't count as prize money because you get it either way, whether you win or not. So I know some managers that are in jurisdictions where the athletic commission will permit there even being a professional bout with no compensation or with only win bonus. But yeah, it is technically permissible to do the fights on a visitor visa if it's only for prize money. But I like to, when I can, I tell them only do that like if you have to, and try not to, because it's still going to raise a question that could come up when you try to switch over. And it's kind of an open air, gray area if you can do this on what's called the P1S. That's what a lot of the training partners get if they're not on a B1, which is the visitor. There's a P1S, which is essential support staff. And there's, even within immigration lawyers, there's people that depend on whether you can compete for prize money on a P1S, even though you can do that on the B1, B2 visitor visa. Got
it. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think this definitely sounds complicated.
So right now we're doing a lot of P1Ss for the coaches of UFC fighters more than like the training staff. Because you got to think, if you're like a coach in Brazil and you have 5 fighters in UFC, if you're trying to do this on a B visa, you're going to be trying to come on that all the time. And eventually they're going to look at you like, what are you doing here? And that's when they switch over to the P1S. Matter of fact, we just did one for the coach of Jessica Andrade, who also has a couple teammates in the UFC. And so it works great for them. They can get out. We did it for Coach Bob, who's Jairzinho Rosenstruck's head coach. And there's a lot of success with that.
Yeah, no, that's great that you're able to get those guys in there, especially as this situation with getting visas continues to evolve. Now, I saw that, and I believe it's the pinned tweet on your Twitter account saying from September 9th, saying that things have changed dramatically through consular, processing issues and things of that nature. Can you dive into that a little bit, or is that what you're talking about here with where you're having to deal with several consulates and getting the appointments?
Well, with that one, I was talking about even before that. Right now, the approval process is even kind of messed up. So there's something called premium processing, where if you pay an extra fee to the government, and right now it's $1,440, you're supposed to be able to get responses in 15 calendar days or less for an approval or denial. But it seems to me that the staffing is not, there's a problem with the intake, because almost every petition that I've submitted since probably June has received what we call a request for evidence, where they ask for more evidence. And I think that's just because they don't really have time to look at these cases in the time they're supposed to. And some of these are straightforward cases, and it's gotten to the point where I already know I know it's coming. So I just press send on the request for evidence because I already know it's coming. And these are for athletes that have gold medals, because I do a lot of boxing visas. I'm the immigration attorney for Top Rank Inc. right now. And sometimes it just seems like I have to send petitions in the mail a couple times. Like, it seems like they're losing mail too. So, I'm just hoping that things get better and back to normal with the premium processing service, so I can have more of a accurate gauge on the time that's going to take me to get the athletes in, because this getting the approvals only the first part of the process before I have to go to the consular offices, which are closed. And then you have to get the national interest exemption, and they're all different about that. Some of them like them, some of them don't. It's just all different.
And yeah, that sounds crazy, especially if you're paying for a premium processing and then they're making you do more evidence and things of that nature. Sounds like something's going on there. If you don't pay for premium processing, how long does this take you to get a visa? Is that something you ever do with any of these athletes at this point?
Yeah, some of them do. Like, so say if you're already in the United States and you can do regular processing, because you can stay in the country while your visa is pending. And then sometimes it just comes to a financial decision where, the athlete just doesn't have it yet. But if you're looking at regular processing, it's common for responses to take 4 to 6 months. So if your first response isn't an approval, then you can be looking at 8 months to get your approval down.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a long time out. And especially in some of these situations where visas are granted to fighters, and we've seen a lot, especially in the era of COVID, where fights drop out, right? Last minute or a couple weeks out, things of that nature. Does that affect these visas at all in terms of if a fighter's coming in on a particular visa for an event and then that event is changed or that bout is canceled? Are they still allowed in the country? Is that an easy process to amend? What does that look like?
It kind of depends how close they're looking. Traditionally, it wouldn't, but we've seen situations where it has. There's a situation I wrote about with, I think it was UFC 250, and there was some Brazilians that were looking to come in, and it was right when COVID, actually, was it 250? It might have been 250 or 49, but it's right when COVID hit and they shut down all the events. What happened was when they had their visa stamped and everything ready to go. They get to the airport and they're like, well, we see that all the events have been canceled this far for the year, so we're not letting you in because of the COVID ones. I haven't heard of an example where the opponent gets hurt, because probably they're not, they wouldn't know that the opponent got hurt to look that close, but it wouldn't surprise me if they ever do start, bringing that up. But there have situations where the whole event or the sport is shut down to where they can't get in on the P1A visas. And for this reason, if the fighter's really good, sometimes we put them on O1A visas, which stands for extraordinary ability visas. And these ones aren't tied to having specific events. For example, you can come on an O visa and do seminars or podcasts. It has a much more greater work authorization, so you can still come in even if all the events get shut down, if the O1A visa is structured properly to support that.
Gotcha. And so with this O1 visa, is that more for, because you say it's extraordinary abilities, so are we talking about then for big stars like Conor McGregor, for Weili Zhang, or are we talking about ranked fighters getting those visas easier? And just to follow up on that as well, have you noticed that certain superstar athletes are able to get things processed faster than others? Is that a trend you've seen?
No, well, okay, I answer the first one of what type of fighter should get this. So it's not necessarily that they have to be, like, it helps if they're the champion because they're kind of automatically qualified. But you don't have to be ranked. Like, for example, I did an O1A for Herbert Burns, who's not ranked yet. He's going to be in the UFC featherweight division, but he has a lot of stuff in jiu-jitsu and stuff. So when I submit petitions for mixed martial artists, I rarely call them a mixed martial artist. I just call them a martial artist. So that way I can use their accomplishments from any combat sport that they participated in. And then in the O1A category, it's not just like, well, how good are you? Let me look at your rankings. There's like there's specific categories they look at. What is your contribution to the industry? In Herbert's situation, he was with the Evolve school in, where is that? I think it's in Singapore, I believe, where he was actually teaching classes, which fit right into one of those categories. But say if you're ranked like 15th, but you aren't getting paid well yet, you don't have a lot of press on you and things like that, even though you're ranked top 15 in the world, you still might not be a good candidate for the O1 visa because you don't fill enough of the categories to be a good candidate there.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense to try and get them on, especially because there's so many MMA fighters that do have, world accolades in jiu-jitsu or in a particular like taekwondo, whatever sport, that makes sense to go that route. Now, I want to be careful here because of the political rabbit hole we could go down, but with the election coming up and a possible new administration coming in, if that happens, do you foresee any changes to these types of visas? Is this a top-down type policy, or is this something that kind of supersedes where even if a new administration came in, it's unlikely that this type of these types of situations with the visas would change for athletes and things of that nature?
Right. That's a good question. And like I'll say it like this, I've seen how rapidly it can change over 3 years one way. I don't know how long it would take to fix certain things because there's just kind of a cloud over what's happened to their operations. Like how many people that were there knew what they're doing quit, how many new people that are there that don't know what they're doing, and there's a lot. Like there's quite a bit of them. You know, just because like, you know, the administration changes, there's going to be a lot of holes to fill. It seems like when it comes to the Department of Homeland Security and United States Immigration and Citizenship Services, USCIS. We hope that it happens quickly just because we need consistency. You know, just he's kind of like, referee, tell me what the rules are. You know what I mean? So that way I can at least be consistent with my results, because we don't believe in getting denials. Like, you know, like I even though I can count my denials on you know, there's probably two hands now. I'm thinking about like 6 or 7. You know what I mean? They'll stick with me. I hate them, and almost all of them are not my fault. You know, it's just like I followed the rules and did what I was supposed to do. But we need to have consistency so I can be accurate with my timing of telling promoters and their management companies when people will be here. Then also be accurate to the clients to say like, hey, this is what you qualify for, and this is what you don't. But the rules are changing so much that when I started, my cover letters were like 3 pages, and then I'd have like 60 pages of supporting evidence. Right now, my cover pages are like 25 pages, and my supporting evidence are anywhere from like 300 to 500 pages every time.
That's crazy. And I mean, I'm assuming there that we're not talking about custom 300 to 500 pages, right? Supporting evidence. There's a lot of things that you could transfer between each athlete, or are we talking like 300, 500 pages of you've got to do a ton of research and they're all extremely unique? Like, what does that look like? Because I can't imagine.
Right. So, like, if it's mixed martial arts, you know, I feel that we're one of the premier mixed martial arts immigration law firms in the nation. So, you know, I have packets of information stashed somewhere that I can access quickly and put this together. So we have a pretty fast response. I can't imagine anybody being faster than us on MMA or boxing, just because we know where to go, we know who to talk to and stuff like that. And since I've started, the quality, I wouldn't say like the quality, but just like the background and of our fighters have improved. When we, you know, I didn't start out getting referrals from the UFC or getting referral, you know, top ranked boxing. It was just whoever would call, and they might not have, you know, a gold medal. You know, they might not have a championship in Ryzen. You know, they just might have like a little regional thing in a couple wrestling tournaments. But the thing you learn from dealing with athletes that don't have that type of background is you get good at filling in the holes. And so now that, you know, fortunately we get a lot of calls from athletes that have better backgrounds, it's clockwork to us to get them approved as far as them being eligible. You know, so now that we can get people approved pretty much every time, as far as like you're an eligible athlete for O1 or P1, now they attack structural things like they might say, hey, your bout is not listed on the internet. And it's kind of like, well, I tell them, you know, you can't really have this $1 million fight listed on the internet and it's not signed yet. He doesn't know if he can get here before people start betting on it. Media people start running around it. And it's on TV, which your broadcast partner's pissed, you know. And then I can tell him, since I do so many other sports, is it's like I do, 20 different sports, and none of them have people listed on the internet for like, track. You can't go and see like who's listed on the internet like for each meet for like years. It's just like, so that can't possibly be part of the regulations. What are we talking about here? And almost every time it's successful, except for those times where they just decide they don't care what I said and they do what they want to anyway. It's a crazy time.
Yeah, that sounds nuts. Because, I don't know how that, especially with some of these sports where, if you're talking about a tournament or you're talking about something where I'm thinking of any team sport like the NHL, right, where depending on how their team does, that depends whether or not they make it to the playoffs. So I don't know how you could put that in the regulations and say, oh, we have to have this bout listed somewhere on the internet. That's crazy.
I had one that said we found a list of unsanctioned bouts and we did not see the person's name there. I'm like, what even is that? I had one that was like, I listed he was a kickboxer. Well, he is still a kickboxer, and he was like, I said he's in the European Championships, the South Asian Championships, and they're like, These all appear to be national awards, which, mind you, is fine. It can be a national award. And they said it wasn't, these weren't international competitions, even though by their definition is like, this is a world championship. I don't know how you're.
Yeah, that sounds crazy. That's nuts. One other thing that I was thinking about in terms of watching that podcast again with you and Jason Cruz was, I know towards the end you mentioned that you had heard some rumblings about the cost of some of these things, right? The visas were at that point, I think, $3,000, but you had heard rumblings of them going up to $50,000. Is there any update on that? Is that something that looks like it's coming to fruition, or?
Yeah, so that was about the H-1B program, which is like it's the most common program if somebody's like going to school and they get their MBA and then they go to like a tech or software thing. Yeah, there was like rumblings. I heard that they're going to charge $50,000 for filing fees on that. They did propose some new pricing that was supposed to go into effect tomorrow, but it got an injunction that was issued yesterday. So those prices are not going in, but it wasn't anything like $50,000. I think they increased it by probably about like $1,000 or $2,000 for those ones, because there's going to be ridiculous lobbying over that, because some of the biggest companies in the nation have a lot of H-1B, some people, but yeah, look, that's not my category, so it wasn't. It didn't affect me too much. They are raising the price of the O1A visa from $460 to $705 for the regular processing, and then they're changing premium processing to where it was 15 calendar days to be 15 business days. So that makes so if they send an RFE, or even if they don't, I mean, that can make an 8 day difference, which is a lot. The promoters, they don't care. They're just like, when can he get here? When can he get here? I'm just like,
Yeah, no, promoters, especially with some of these bigger promoters, yeah, they could care less. I've interviewed many of them, and I'm sure they understand the plight, but they're businessmen. They just want the results, right? They don't care how you get them. Right. And so, this has been extremely informative. The last thing I have to ask, just because I've been asked a lot of questions about it, and when I said I was going to do this interview with you, several people reached out to me about this. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but obviously Conor McGregor is lobbying for this charity fight with Dustin Poirier, trying to do it outside the UFC. Who knows about the legalities of that? But in terms of getting a fight done in Dublin, I guess, I believe Ireland is still on, one of these COVID banned lists. So I'm not sure is that even possible? Could Dustin Poirier go to Ireland and do that and still come back? What does that all look like? Is that even?
Can he come back? I'm thinking that to come back, I think, because you got to realize I don't deal with a lot of Americans on the business end. I'm dealing more with the fighters, but I think that the COVID-19 ban doesn't affect American citizens. So American citizens could go to France and come back. It's just the foreign nationals that need visas and stuff like that is affecting them from coming here.
Gotcha. And so
I think we can go.
Yeah.
I don't know, but Dublin might not be allowing Americans in. They might have. That's the thing that's going on. They might not let Americans to come visit.
Yeah, no, I could imagine, especially just the reciprocal banning of things. I know that's a thing in the visa world. That depending on limits and things like that, they might not be allowed to come in. That's a good point.
Yeah, and I think the Dublin's not in the EU, so I know the EU has some restrictions against Americans coming in, but Dublin has their own system, because I don't think they're in the EU. So maybe so. I doubt it though.
Yeah, I doubt it too. That sounds about right. Well, thank you so much. This has been super informative. I understand this process a lot more now than I did going into this interview. Where can we find you? Anything big you're working on that you want to promote? Anything like that?
Yeah. So on social media, it's Sherrod Sports Visas. Very active on Instagram. I'm getting better at Twitter. And then on our website, www.sherrodsportsvisas.com, you can usually find out about recent recent success stories with a lot of people that you guys know. I do have something big that we just got done, but I got to figure out how much I can talk about it first. But stay tuned. Stay tuned. We had something pretty big happen in boxing that I'm very proud of and fought hard for. Way harder than I should have, but should have had to. Not that I should have had to. It should have been easier for me to do this. But yeah, I should have an update on soon. It just happened yesterday, and I'm not sure how much I could talk about it. I need to make sure that they don't take it back.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love for you to break the story here, but I also don't want to be that guy that caused some big fight to not happen. So let's just keep it under wraps for now. But thank you again for so much for coming on and for all the information. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. And you have a good one.
Thanks, you too.
Peace.